Creativitis, written by Mr. Nowak. Illustrated by Nikki Burke and Kelsey Millette. There once was a boy named Mr. Nowak. He wore a pair of safety glasses and all of his shirts were plaid. Mr. Nowak's mother was an elementary school teacher and his father was a woodworker. They watched as he continuously built bicycles and blanket forts. Eventually, Mr. Nowak was diagnosed with creativitis, an inflammation of the creative center of the brain. Thankfully, the doctor told Mr. Nowak's parents that this wasn't a bad thing.
It just means that he will need to be designing and building things. Lots of things, he told them.
Is it contagious? His parents asked.
Can be, said the doctor, but the conditions must be just right.
Is there a cure? They asked.
No, said the doctor, but there is a simple treatment. You must always provide your son with access to 3 important things: materials, tools, and a space to build.
And if he doesn't have these things? Asked Mr. Nowak's parents.
The doctor jumped forward out of his chair and exclaimed, "If you don't provide your son with the opportunity to use his creativitis, he will lose it and risk a new diagnosis: boredom. That would be a very bad thing."
And so, Mr. Nowak's parents provided him with materials, tools, and a space to build. He was always designing and building things, and he was never bored. Every day, his creativitis got worse, which wasn't a bad thing. It turns out that his parents and his siblings had creativitis too. It truly was contagious, and the conditions in their home had always been just right. When Mr. Nowak grew up, he went to design school. He learned about new tools and new technologies. He was always designing and building things. He had all the materials, tools, and space to do it. His creativitis got worse again, which wasn't a bad thing. Soon after, he got a job as a woodworking teacher, making both his parents very proud. He made his shop a welcome space for his students, and the conditions were just right. Then he started teaching design, and animation, and then movie making too. His creativitis was off the charts, which wasn't a bad thing. Mr. Nowak had new materials, new tools, and a new space. He was always designing and building things, and he was never bored. Some of his students started to get diagnosed with creativitis too, as Mr. Nowak had become highly contagious. They were constantly designing and building things. The conditions were just right. But then one day, something changed. Mr. Nowak's creativitis started getting better, which wasn't a good thing. He wasn't designing and building things, and he found himself getting bored. He went back to see his doctor. "I know what's wrong," his doctor said. "You don't have any money for materials. Your tools are old and your space is unfocused and cluttered. The conditions are just not right." It was true. There was less money for materials, no funding for new tools and technology, and the spaces where he and his students worked had become cluttered and neglected. Mr. Nowak asked about getting more money for materials, new tools, and new technology, but nothing happened. His creativitis began to go away altogether, which was a very bad thing. With all the creativity he could muster, Mr. Nowak designed and built some new projects that he shared online. That caused a small spike in his creativitis levels, and students started to share their projects too. Eventually, they won a really cool new tool, and there was a huge spike in creativitis levels, which was a very good thing. Now, even some of his students were becoming contagious, spreading creativitis all across the school. Mr. Nowak was always designing and building things, and so were his students. The conditions were just right. But as time passed, things changed again. Students were being diagnosed with new conditions. Social mediosis and textitis drastically affected their creativitis, and that wasn't a good thing. Then, the school population started to decline. which meant less money to buy materials, less money to buy tools, and less money to maintain spaces. Mr. Nowak's creativitis was getting less contagious, which was not so good. Again, he asked for money for materials, new tools, and spaces, but still, nothing happened. Mr. Nowak used some of his dwindling creativity to scrounge for free materials. But all the stuff just cluttered his spaces and took time away from designing and creating new projects. Creativitis levels were at an all-time low, which was not a very good thing at all. Soon, almost all of Mr. Nowak's students had severe cases of boredom. The conditions were definitely not right. He went back to see his doctor. His creativitis was almost gone again, which was a very, very bad thing. He needed something, anything, to get back on track. His doctor said, "Mr. Nowak, you need to make it real." "Make it real?" Mr. Nowak asked. "Yes," said his doctor. "I think you have enough creativity left to tackle one more project." So Mr. Nowak searched online to see what Make It Real was all about. He found a contest that offered amazing prizes. Overjoyed, he started to plan how he could win the contest in order to help create a new makerspace at his school. This would be a very, very good thing. Then everyone would see what Creativitis was all about. Then, when he asked for more money for materials, tools, and space improvements, something might happen. The conditions could once again be just right. Mr. Nowak started writing down his story. He contacted Nikki, a former student with high levels of creativitis. He asked if she would illustrate the story for him, since the contest deadline was only 2 weeks away. And he was still busy asking for money, scrounging for materials, and cleaning up his cluttered spaces. Nikki agreed and asked for some help from Kelsey, her favorite person to design and build with. All their creativitis levels started to get much worse, which was a fantastic, very good thing. That night, Mr. Nowak's creativitis would not let him sleep. He was too excited about his plan. He went to his garage and stayed up all night building bicycles and blanket forts. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of a new creative space at his school. A space where creativitis was highly contagious. A place that would attract attention and demand new funding and support. A space that could continue to grow and inspire a new generation of makers. A space that could open career opportunities to students who might not have given a second thought about design and technology. Mr. Nowak saw a space that would reignite his own levels of creativitis. The conditions were going to be just right once again. This was a very good thing.